There was a moment that probably happened more than once. Someone in your family did something, got a grade, won something, said something funny at the table, and the room lit up. You watched it happen. The attention, the laughter. The way everyone leaned in toward that person, the way the energy in the room shifted and gathered around someone who wasn't you, and you sat there, not angry, not crying, just quietly registering something that you didn't have words for yet. This is not my turn. It is never quite my turn. And then, because you were that kind of child, you smiled, you participated, you were happy for them, genuinely, or close enough to genuinely that nobody could tell the difference, including you. Because you had already learned by then how to make your own hunger invisible, how to be present in a room while the room's attention lived somewhere else. And you got so good at it, so practiced, so quietly efficient at needing less, at taking up less, at mattering less loudly, that people started calling it your personality. You're so easygoing, you're so low maintenance, you never cause any trouble, and you accepted the description because it was better than the alternative. Better than admitting that underneath the easygoing, underneath the low maintenance, underneath all the quiet competence, there was a child who just wanted the room to lean in toward them once without them having to do anything extraordinary to deserve it. The undervalued sibling is rarely the product of cruelty. That's the part nobody tells you, and it's the part that makes it so hard to process. There was no villain, no obvious moment, no single event you can point to and say, that's where it happened. It happened in the accumulation, in the way attention in your family followed noise, followed crisis, followed whoever needed the most visibly, most immediately. And you, who had learned early that needing quietly was safer than needing loudly, fell below the threshold of what got noticed. Not because you were less, because you were less visible. And in a family, as in most systems, invisible gets interpreted as fine. They don't need as much, they're so independent, they'll be okay. And you were okay. You learned to be okay, with a thoroughness that should have worried someone, but didn't, because okay doesn't create urgency. Here are 6 things that happen inside the undervalued sibling that follow them into every relationship, every room, every moment someone offers attention. They're not sure they're allowed to receive. Every family is a system, and systems organize themselves around roles. The smart one, the funny one, the responsible one, the difficult one, the golden one. These roles are rarely assigned deliberately. They emerge from the needs of the system, from what each child does. That gets a response, and what they do that doesn't. The child who gets a response for being exceptional keeps being exceptional. The child who gets a response for being in crisis keeps finding themselves in crisis. And the child who gets the most response for being manageable, for being stable, for being the one who doesn't add to the weight of an already weighted room, learns to stay manageable at a cost. Because manageable requires suppression. It requires the ongoing editing of whatever is actually happening inside into something the room can comfortably continue through. Psychologists call this emotional parentification, not in the dramatic sense of a child being forced into an adult role, but in the quieter sense of a child learning that the emotional needs of the system come before their own, that their job in this particular family is to not be a job. And they do it well, because that's what children do. With the roles they're given, they inhabit them completely, until the role and the person become almost impossible to tell apart. Here is the belief that gets built in the undervalued sibling through no single moment, but through the accumulation of many. Love is available, but not unconditionally. Attention is possible, but you have to earn it, and what earns it is not simply being yourself. The child who watches another sibling receive warmth for their grades, their talent, their humor, their struggles, draws a conclusion, not consciously, in the body, in the nervous system, in the part of the mind that is always running the calculation of what this environment requires to get what it needs. Being valuable requires producing value. Being loved requires being lovable in a specific way that I haven't quite figured out yet, but I'm working on it. And the working on it never stops. It follows the undervalued sibling out of the family home into every relationship they build as adults. They work, they help, they show up. They become the most reliable person in every room they enter, not because reliability is their nature, but because reliability was the thing that came closest to making them feel like they belonged in the rooms they were in. And when someone loves them, simply, without requiring anything, they don't trust it, because love that arrives without conditions doesn't match the template, and what doesn't match the template feels wrong even when it's right. At some point, the undervalued sibling stops asking, "What do I feel?" and starts asking, "What does this situation need?" Not as a conscious decision, as an adaptation. When your emotional expression consistently produces less response than someone else's, you begin to redirect that energy inward, toward usefulness, toward reading the room before you decide whether to take up any of its space. Research in developmental psychology is consistent on this. Children who receive inconsistent emotional validation develop heightened self-monitoring. They become extraordinarily perceptive of other people's needs and progressively less connected to their own. The undervalued sibling grows into the adult who always knows how everyone in the room is feeling but goes blank when someone asks how they are. Not because nothing is happening inside, because they have spent so long orienting outward that inward became unfamiliar territory. They are the person everyone calls, the one who listens without judgment, the one who holds other people's pain with a steadiness that other people find remarkable. And they are remarkable, but the steadiness is not peace, it is practice. Decades of practice at holding things without letting anyone see how much holding costs. Here is the wound that is hardest to treat because it is hardest to name. Nothing bad enough happened. That's what the undervalued sibling tells themselves. That's what makes this specific pain so difficult to process, so easy to dismiss, so hard to bring to anyone without immediately qualifying it. I know it wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. My parents loved me. It's not like anything happened. But absence is something. The absence of being turned toward, the absence of being the one the room reorganized itself around even once, the absence of hearing without prompting, without performing, without producing something worthy of notice. I see you. I'm glad you're here. Tell me more about that. Psychologists call this emotional neglect, and unlike physical neglect, which leaves evidence, emotional neglect leaves nothing visible, no event, no scar. Just a child who gradually, quietly, stopped expecting to be the answer to anyone's question, and that child grown into an adult carries a grief they have no language for, because you cannot grieve what you never had words for wanting. You just feel a persistent sourceless ache, a sense that something is missing, even in rooms that should feel full, a loneliness that doesn't go away when you're surrounded by people, because it isn't about people. It's about the specific feeling of being turned toward that the system you grew up in didn't reliably produce, and you have been, without knowing it, looking for that feeling in every room you have entered since. The undervalued sibling often becomes exceptional at school, at work, at being the person everyone relies on, and from the outside, this looks like success. But from the inside, it feels like running toward a finish line that keeps moving, because the achievement was never the goal. The goal was what achievement was supposed to deliver. The moment when the room finally turned, when the attention finally arrived, when someone finally said, "I see you," not because you did something, but because you're here, and that's enough. And when the achievement comes, and the attention comes with it, it feels good, for a moment. And then it fades, and the undervalued sibling is left with the accomplishment, and the same hollow feeling as before, because what they needed was never available was a reward for performance. What they needed was available for free to other children and other families who learned early that their presence was enough. The undervalued sibling never learned that. So they keep building, keep proving, keep producing more evidence for a case that should have been settled before they were old enough to build anything. The moment of change for the undervalued sibling is not dramatic. It is not a confrontation, not a conversation with the sibling who was favored. Not a reckoning with the parents who didn't distribute attention fairly. It is quieter than that. It is the moment when the undervalued sibling looks at the pattern across their whole life and names it honestly for the first time. I have been making myself smaller in every room I have ever entered because the first room I was in taught me that smaller was easier to love. That recognition is the beginning of everything, not because naming it erases it, but because a pattern you can see is a pattern you can choose whether to continue, and the choice for the undervalued sibling is not to become louder, not to compete, not to finally demand what was withheld. The choice is simpler and harder. To stop treating their own needs as an imposition, to stop editing themselves before anyone has asked them to stop assuming that the room has already decided they are background. Because that assumption was never about the room. It was about the first room. And most rooms are not that room. You were the easygoing one, the low-maintenance one, the one who didn't need as much. And you played the role so completely for so long that you started to believe it was a description rather than an adaptation. But here is what was actually true. The entire time, you needed just as much. You just learned to need it quietly, to want it privately, to carry the longing in a place where nobody would have to inconvenience themselves by responding to it. That was not maturity. That was a child solving the problem of a system that didn't have enough attention to go around by removing themselves from the equation. And it worked. The system ran smoothly. Nobody worried about you, but you were always there, needing, wanting, hoping in the specific quiet way of someone who has learned that hope is safer when it stays small. You are allowed to let it be larger now. Not louder, larger. You are allowed to take up space without producing something to justify the space. You are allowed to need without the need being a problem. You are allowed to be the one the room turns toward, not because you earned it, but because you are there, and being there was always enough. The system that taught you otherwise was wrong, not cruel, not malicious, just wrong. And you do not have to keep living inside a conclusion that was drawn by a child in a room that didn't know how to see you. You are seeable. You always were.